Good day, listener. Welcome to HDS 201, African Response to European Invasion, Study Session 1. Introduction. Factors responsible for European invasion of Africa. 1. Economic factor. In this session, you will explore the historical background and the economic factors that precipitated the European invasion of Africa. For the purpose of this unit, emphasis is on the economic reasons, such as the quest for raw materials, the search for markets, and investment of surplus capital. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Describe the pre-colonial relationship between Africa and Europe. 2. Explain the factors that made Europeans to turn to Africa for raw materials. 3. Describe the patterns of European creation of overseas markets for their products in Africa. Pre-colonial relationship between Africa and Europe. Europeans had been interested in Africa before 1882. They had, before the 7th century BC, been curious about the flora and the fauna of Africa. Early efforts at exploring and making contact with Africa had been made by the Phoenicians in the 7th century BC. However, it was in the 15th century that a systematic and government-backed attempt at exploring and making contact with Africa really began. The Portuguese blazed the trail. The Portuguese were mainly interested in trade. They established trading ports or forts in strategic areas along the coast of West and Southeast Africa. They were followed from the 16th century onwards by the Spaniards, the Dutch, the French, the British, the Germans, and the Italians. Although they purchased African products such as gold, ivory, and pepper, they engaged largely in the slave trade, which had begun in the 16th century. Abolition of slave trade and Europeans in Africa. African states and kingdoms, both on the coast and in the hinterlands, retained their independence. The sovereignties of their rulers were in no way subverted by the European traders and visitors. After the abolition of the slave trade, Europeans became increasingly interested in African products. Their activities were supported by their various home governments, whose interests had transcended trade to acquisition of territories. From the foregoing, one can realize that the invasion of Africa by Europeans did not begin in 1982. It is a phenomenon which began a long time ago, but whose momentum increased tremendously during our period of study. Reasons for European conquest of Africa. The quest for raw materials for the manufacturing industry in Europe. The Industrial Revolution was launched in Europe early in the 19th century. The revolution involved the invention and use of machines to produce articles which had hitherto been made by hand. As the revolution took off, these various countries needed raw materials such as cotton, palm oil, ivory, and rubber to keep production going in their manufacturing industries. These raw materials are products available abundantly in the tropical regions of Africa. Consequently, the continent became the focus of attention of the industrialized Europe countries. The search for markets. Industrialized European countries also needed markets for the sale of their manufactured products. The search for new markets became very competitive because each country sought to monopolize trade in African territories where its nationals were engaged in commercial activities. The establishment of trade monopoly was undertaken through the introduction of high tariffs or custom duties directed against goods from other European countries. In this way, each European country tried to protect its own markets and products from foreign competition. The result of this development was that European countries such as Britain, France, and Germany became rivals in their search for exclusive areas of trade in Africa, each trying to edge the other out by imposing high tariffs on each other's goods. Protective tariffs in Europe and the search for African markets. Traders from Britain, France, and Germany, who were adversely affected by the protective tariffs of their industrialized nation, petitioned their respective country in Europe. Britain was more adversely affected by the protective tariffs than other European countries. It became imperative for any European power seeking exclusive market in Africa to acquire colonies in the continent in order to guarantee free enterprise for its traders and industrialists and protect its goods from foreign competition. Thus, acquisition of colonies in Africa became one of the core cornerstones of the policies of industrialized European countries. Industrialized European nations, which had accumulated great capital from their industrial ventures, were eager to invest this capital elsewhere in the world under their political control. Many Europeans believed in the theory of economic imperialism propounded by Hobson and Lenin and sought for empires whose economy could be exploited for profit. Europe and future economic prospects of Africa. It has been argued that Europe invested more capital in Asia and America than in Africa, and that perhaps the need for capital investment might not adequately explain European invasion of the continent. It should be noted that the Europeans' concern was not the present but future economic prospects of Africa. Summary. In the study session, you learned that 1. The European invasion of Africa did not start in 1882. It began gradually a long time ago. 2. The peaceful penetration of Africa by European traders, missionaries, and adventurers escalated into scramble in the 19th century. 3. The economic reasons responsible for the scramble for territorial acquisition of the continent are the need to obtain raw materials for manufacturing industries in Europe, the need for markets for the sale of manufactured products because industrialized nations had produced goods more than their home markets could absorb. European countries in the 19th century possessed huge capital which they had accumulated from the gains of Industrial Revolution, the desire to acquire territories in Africa where they could profitably invest their money. End of study session 1. Thanks for listening.